Outside a courthouse in Miami today, supporters of Donald Trump turned out for his historic arraignment on federal charges. This is just a few hours ago. A motorcade of black SUVs leaving the courthouse, Trump inside one of them after he gave his fingerprints and delivered a not guilty plea to all 37 charges related to the mishandling of classified documents. Afterwards, he visited a restaurant and had this to say.
I think it's a rigged deal here. We have a rigged country. We have a country that's corrupt. We have a country that's got no borders. We have a country that's got nothing but problems. We're a nation in decline. And then they do this stuff. And you see where the people are. We love the people. And you see where they are. You see the crowds and everything else. We have a country that is in decline like never before. And we can't let it happen. I'm going to make a little speech tonight in Bedminster. And I hope you're going to be there.
So are these charges enough to shake Trump's base? For more on this, we're joined by Jay Shabria, Republican strategist and managing director at MAD Global Strategy in Columbus, Ohio, and Craig Verhoga, a Democratic strategist in Washington. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this.
Jay, let's start with you. For a second time in 2 months, Trump is facing criminal charges, this time federal charges to illegally hoarding classified documents. Is this it for Donald Trump? How do you think this plays?
Oh, look, we may have 2 or 3 more indictments too coming. How do I think this plays? There's two separate questions, right? In terms of one, the Republican primary, and then 2, the general election. And they both kind of feed off of each other. Look, I do think this strengthens him in the Republican primary. Today, in the latest Gallup poll about people that are dissatisfied with their country, with the direction that the United States is heading, that's 18% are satisfied. There is a big problem in this country right now where people just don't believe in the big institutions. This is a pretty precarious decision by the Biden administration, in my opinion. I truly can't understand how they indicted the former president when the current president had something very similar that happened when he had classified documents in his garage too. I really don't quite get it. I think the American people are going to be scratching their heads. So in the short term, this is going to benefit him certainly with the Republican primary. I think his opponents in the Republican primary are not going to know how to deal with this properly. And in the long term, I don't think this is necessarily going to play out the way most pundits or most of the media are going to say it's going to play out. I think it's actually going to help him.
So, Craig, does it help him in the short term with Republicans, but hurt him in the long term with moderates and swing voters? What's your sense?
Look, I mean, after 8 years of Donald Trump, the country is exhausted. We're just tired of all of this stuff. We're tired of the excuses. And honestly, we're tired of the law breaking. I think in the short term, yes, it may help him a little bit in the Republican primary. However, there are almost a dozen candidates running now. They're running because they think that Donald Trump is vulnerable in the Republican primary. And they believe that no one's above the law. They are not supporting, somebody hoarding nuclear secrets or telling their attorneys to lie about this. And they're not defending, a former president being on tape telling witnesses to lie because the former president took nuclear secrets. So I think that what's different today than in the past is that we have close to a dozen Republicans who are running, some of them who worked in the Trump administration, all of whom think they're better than he is. All of them think that he's not the best choice to run next year. And, I think that is a significant difference. And I think just if we're handicapping it, they understand, that no one is above the law. They're not being very, aggressive in saying that, but that's what they think.
Jay, we are seeing some daylight, some criticism by Republicans of Trump for this. I know you mentioned the Biden document case, but they returned them right away. They didn't try to hide them and show them to other people.
You can go through all kinds of mental gymnastics and say how there's differences. It's the same thing. And Hillary Clinton, by the way, destroyed her server too. So look, they have done the same thing for years. And look, I've never been a Trump backer myself, but this on the face of it doesn't make sense. And look, it is fantastic. I don't pretend to actually understand how Democratic Party politics works. I mean, they have a person right now that's polling at over 20%, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's kind of a nut job, and against a sitting president. That's an unusual thing too. So, I mean, it is a very strange thing when that happens as well. Is there going to be a vigorous primary? I expect there is going to be one, but I do think that Donald Trump's probably, as long as his health is okay and as long as he's not sitting in jail, I expect him to be the nominee. I do think this helps him. I think that especially when you're going to see the hyperventilating from the Democrats, from the media, and from the rest of the elite, it's only going to strengthen him in the party. And I actually think it's going to strengthen him for the general election too.
Craig, though, is it the same thing as Jay says? I mean,
no, it isn't. I'm glad you asked that question. Every document that is cited in this indictment are documents that Donald Trump refused to return.
Right.
When they went to Mar-a-Lago the first time, they returned some documents. Those documents are not included. These are documents that they retained after the FBI went there. These are documents that Donald Trump told the attorneys to lie about. It is completely different. And the other thing here, it isn't just President Biden. Vice President Pence, accidentally had documents that he had taken, and when it was discovered that they were there, he returned them. He was not indicted for that because he actually did the right thing once they found the documents. Donald Trump kept them, told people to lie about them, and those documents included nuclear secrets. That were the only places that they were being shared. Were with our our strongest allies like Canada, Australia, England, and New Zealand, the Five Eyes. Mm-hmm. And what Donald Trump had were documents that endangered the entire world. He kept them, and he thinks he's above the law, and he isn't. And that doesn't mean. That doesn't mean he's guilty. That doesn't mean that he's going to get convicted. That doesn't mean that the judge that was appointed by Trump in 2020 is not going to rule in his favor. However, he took documents. He lied about it. He told his attorneys to lie about it.
Yeah. So Jay, just on the politics, right? There's the New York indictment.
Sure.
Now there's the federal indictment. We don't know yet what's going to happen with Georgia, and we don't know yet what's going to happen with January 6th.
I expect you're going to have 2 more indictments, is what I would expect.
Right. So can the Republicans really nominate somebody facing 4 different indictments for 4 different crimes and 4 different jurisdictions?
Yeah, these are questions that certainly we're going to be answering at some point here. But what I would also offer is this. People don't trust these institutions, not just Republicans. People don't trust these institutions. They don't trust the CBC. They don't trust NBC, ABC, CNN here in the States. They don't trust the court system. And the way in which this has been done, it is a very strange thing to actually indict the chief rival to the president when you're sitting there. I mean, if this was done in another country, we would look at it and we say, that doesn't feel right. And especially when, again, you can do the mental gymnastics you want. You could say that it's very different. It's not very different. There's slight differences between the cases, between what Hillary did and what Joe Biden did. There's slight differences. When they're doing the same thing and you're not going after them, it feels strange at the very least, and that feeds into the mistrust the American people have. So can they indict him? Can they nominate him? Sure. And could he win? Sure. Regardless of what the pundits say.
But Craig, I get the mistrust of institutions and I get the mistrust of media. We're all dealing with that in Western countries in some form or another. But the Georgia case is different from what happened today in Miami, which is different than New York, which is different than, say, January 6th. So if it is 4 different indictments, I mean, could the Republicans really have a shot at winning the White House if he goes forward on it?
Look, I mean, at some point, Republican voters and Republican elected officials aren't going to want to lose the 2024 election, and if they don't want to lose, they probably should nominate somebody else. That having been said, the reason why, this is so different from anything else is that we're dealing with a former president who didn't, go along with the peaceful transfer of power, who set a mob against his vice president because his vice president wouldn't break the law, and it's completely unprecedented. We've had 8 years of complete, breaking with American tradition, and and it's like, yeah, I mean, it's remarkable to me that Jay, is admitting ahead of time, that the former president of the United States is going to get indicted 2 more times before the election. That's not a conspiracy. That is a judgment on Donald Trump's character and his inability to recognize that no one is above the law. And that's a political problem long term for the Republicans, but it is a bigger problem for the United States.
Yes, it is an interesting political time in your country, gentlemen. I want to thank you both for joining me to deal with this today. Jay Shabria and Craig Vroga. Thanks so much, gang.
Okay. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Former President Trump is facing 37 federal charges, and today he entered a plea of not guilty to those charges, which include unlawfully retaining government secrets and conspiring to obstruct justice. For more on this story, I'm joined by Bruce Heyman. He served as U.S. Ambassador to Canada from 2014 to 2017 under former U.S. President Barack Obama. Ambassador, it's good to speak with you again.
Good to be here.
I think the last time we spoke was when Donald Trump was arraigned in New York, and you said that was a very sad day for your country. How does it feel now that he's been arraigned a second time, what appears to be far more serious federal charges?
I think it's equally sad, but balancing. And balancing, what I mean is that we should be very happy that we have a justice system that can function even in light of all of the pressures that they have been under for some period of time, where one political party, being controlled by Donald Trump right now, is protecting him as best they can. That being said, this man is a con artist. He threatened American democracy at every turn. And we are now showing the man who did not believe laws applied to him are in fact now finding out that he's going to be held accountable. And a jury is going to have to make these decisions and these charges. But we're now up to 71 between New York and the arraignment that took place today with 37 in Florida. And yet we still are waiting on Georgia. We're still waiting on the January 6th. This man is going to have a lot of legal trouble coming up.
I wonder about the political ripples of all of this, Ambassador, because we know that President Joe Biden is also being investigated for classified documents found. Now, the scale of that and the intent of that, these were found in his home in his former office, very different, no attempt to obstruct by Joe Biden. But the Republicans like to use this as a defense. Do you think Americans will see the distinction?
This isn't about whataboutism. This isn't about, that guy did this or that gal did this. This is about each person, regardless of party, being held accountable to the law. And each person should be held that way. And I'm going to take off any partisan hat that you may think I have had or had previously and say that if someone breaks the law, they need to be held accountable. Now, this man had the most secret, sensitive documents for our national security and national military interests in the bathroom, on the stage of a club, which was frequented by many, many people, on his desk, waving it in his hands, showing it to people, taking it and lying when subpoenaed and requested by the Justice Department to return any documents he had. They specifically said, we have none. And now we have evidence, as presented by the Justice Department, that he purposefully hid these. And that's why we have these counts. So this isn't about anybody else. This is about this man and his breaking the law.
No, and you're not wrong. There is a material difference in what President Biden was found to have done and what former President Trump is accused of doing. There's a massive gap between them. But I wonder, rank and file Republicans kind of shrugged off the state charges in New York. Do you think they'll view these federal charges that were laid in the Miami courthouse differently this time?
There's a group of Republicans that are deep followers of his that will follow him regardless of whatever accusations are thrown his way and whatever charges come his way, and I believe that will be true whether he's found guilty or not. And that's unfortunate, but there are a group of followers that are deep followers of his. And that's why you see this perverse behavior by Republican candidates, because they don't want to alienate his supporters, but yet they recognize the real difficulty they're in with him as a candidate.
Do you think any of the GOP is prepared to break from the former president over this case? Certainly some of the public criticism has been tougher than certainly what we saw in New York. We see people like Ken Buck, who's with the House Freedom Caucus in the U.S., saying that if he's convicted, he will not support a convicted felon for the White House. There seems to be people trying to give themselves some daylight with the former president in a way they haven't done it before.
In the last 24 hours, we saw two people who are running for president of the United States in the Republican ticket. Former Governor Chris Christie in a CNN town hall very specifically went directly at the former president and accused him of incredible violations of ethics, behavior, and being held accountable to these charges. We also saw his former UN ambassador who worked in the administration begin to shift her comments, Nikki Haley. So we're starting to see that. In my own discussions with many people that I know, many Republicans behind closed doors and in quiet want this man to go away. They do not want him as part of the party. They recognize Donald Trump is an anchor tied to the leg of the Republican Party, and they're about ready to swim in deep water. They know they need to separate from him. They just can't figure out how to.
How seriously do you take criticism of people like Chris Christie, who endorsed him before? I mean, we saw Lindsey Graham, for example, say some very tough things about Donald Trump, and look at where Lindsey Graham is right now. Is this just narrow interest because of a primary, or do you think this sticks and this is a permanent sort of cleavage?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I hope more people, find truth and recognize that they were moving down the path of following an idol that was taking them to a very bad place. The former Attorney General Bill Barr was very clear this weekend speaking about the charges and how these charges are well detailed. And if only half of these charges were accurate, he stands the risk of serving quite a many years in jail.
We saw crowds of pro-Trump supporters today, no violence today, though people were worried about this. How concerned are you as this case proceeds of that prospect, or have we moved past that point? I mean, is that overblown at this point, do you think, sir?
I don't think it's overblown, and I very much worry about, his encouraging people to have violent behavior and bad behavior. We saw that in January 6th. And I don't want to underestimate the risk of this man, if he feels under further pressure, further indictments. Look, Georgia is probably likely next here, unless January 6th pops in before Georgia. But right. They've already given a heads up to everybody. The first few weeks of August are likely dates to have some action there.
Do you think this is enough to stop him from getting the nomination? He has such a grip on such a percentage of that party. I mean, do you think this could finally do it to stop Donald Trump?
It's hard to say. I will say the following. I have voted Republican in my life and Democrat. I consider myself an American. I swore an oath under the Constitution of the United States to preserve and protect it. I hope the Republican Party finds its way and has a good candidate that, while I may disagree in policy, I think it's important that the United States of America have a strong two-party system. And what Donald Trump is doing to our country and to that party is beginning to be irreparable damage. And so, I hope they break from him. I hope for the sake of our country and the Republican Party, actually. But it's not clear that that's going to happen.